Welcome. Hi, everybody.
Oh, hello.
I am recording, just FYI, because a number of people couldn't make it. And we said we would send them the recording. So just letting you know if you're arriving, I am recording. If you don't want to be in the recording, you can just go off video. But a number of people couldn't make it here and we wanted them to be able to watch. And I'm sure we'll have a few more people joining us. But good to see folks here and familiar names. And unfamiliar names. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Nicole, do you want to, I think we'll probably have a few people trickle in, but maybe do you want to just kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. If I don't already know you, if we haven't met, I'm Nicole Breit, and Mary and I have been collaborating on some projects and working together on writerly things for a little while now, since last year. And at one of the whole idea for this talk today came out of one of our Monday morning chat sessions where we were just, what are we working on? How can we support each other? And I showed up at the call and I just had to say it. I was feeling really burned out, really frustrated, feeling like a workaholic who never gets to touch her own creativity anymore. And I just kind of dumped that. I just sort of like said it. And Mary said, I am feeling the same way. Let's talk about this. And it opened up into a bigger discussion around capitalism and how we are absorbing these messages all the time about our worth and our value and our productivity, and how hard it is as creatives to find ways to attend to our own work and just make time for ourselves. So I wrote down, as Mary was like commiserating with me and we were sharing, I wrote down the words "New World Order." And we declared that we were going to do some radical things to try and change the impact that these feelings we were having was, how that was affecting our work. So right away, we decided Monday mornings, we were going to do something radical and use Monday mornings to write together, even though everything in our bodies was telling us that Monday mornings is the time for creative entrepreneurs and self-employed people like us to focus on work. And just as a result of having this discussion, we said, wouldn't this be great to talk to other creatives and other writers who might be feeling the same way right now, and just open up and hold space for a conversation so that we can find ways personally and collectively to carve out time for ourselves and honor the creativity and the writing that we need to do. So that's why we're here today. And we were so excited to have you with us so that we can dive into this a little bit more.
Yeah, and that was great. Thank you. And I think we want this to be a conversation, and we also have some exercises that we think will be helpful for all of us to do to focus our thinking around this. But just to piggyback on what Nicole was saying, I think it can even be hard for those of us who, for whom writing is a source of income, because even that becomes pressure in a way. Like then instead of like, should I be making money or should I be writing, the question becomes, should I be doing my writing that's for money, or am I allowed to be doing my writing that's not paid work, or not guaranteed paid work? You don't know if you're going to be paid for it at some point. You hope at some point you'll sell it, but you have no idea. If it's something like, I know a lot of people here working on fiction. If memoirs the same way, though, if it's something that if it's a book project you're working on, you have no idea how much it's going to sell for, or if it's going to sell. I mean, it could, like, the range is incredible. So you really can't, none of us are doing it for that. We're not doing it to make, if we were in it to make money, we'd become eye bakers. So I think it's a really complex kind of analysis, I think, when we're trying to carve out time to be creative. So really what we want to talk about today is when we're faced with this pressure to make money, to pay bills, or just to be productive and useful and contributing, whether or not it's paid labor, this pressure to produce, like not to be a burden, to assist, to be useful. How do we justify and choose creative time? How do we choose to honor this kind of creative voice that is really steeped in like uncertainty and unknowing. Nothing is guaranteed about it, and it can sometimes, I think, um, feel really indulgent, feel selfish, feel radical, to use Nicole's word. So today, the way we wanted to structure the conversation was to really first commiserate a bit. So just becoming aware of this mindset and how this phenomenon manifests in our lives. Mindset might be the wrong word because I don't think it's coming from us. I think it's coming from culture and we're just reacting to it. But like becoming aware of how it's playing out in our lives. And then turning to, in the latter part of the discussion, turning to a discussion of, we can't change it in a macro way, at least not in the short term. So what can we do to work around it? Well, we can work on mindset. So that is something that we can tackle together. And so we can talk about how to do that in the latter part of the conversation. But to kick us off, I think it's really can be fascinating to hear and think about the way that this voice, this pressure, this phenomenon, whatever you want to call it, manifests itself in people's lives. So I'm going to ask us to do a little bit of brainstorming and write down some of the things this voice says to us. But to get us started, I'll tell you a few of the things that Nicole and I have come up with, things that it says to us. Things like, it's frivolous to be creative. You aren't making money doing this, so why are you doing it? This is a waste of time. This isn't going to amount to anything. Shouldn't you be doing X? So let's hear, let's actually take a moment maybe, and let's take like 2 minutes and actually write down. If you don't have a writing surface and utensil, grab one. I'm gonna have to grab one myself. And let's write down some ways that this kind of pressure, the productivity pressure of the world, weighs in specifically in our minds. Okay, 2 minutes. All right, we're going to do a bit of a tech experiment here. So if you can find, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to have a whiteboard. And if you go to the top of the screen, somewhere on your screen, you should have a view options button. And if you go to view options, there's a drop down and you should see annotate. And if you click on annotate, you should see an opportunity to write on the screen. If you can't find it, you can just write it in the chat and I'll put it on the screen for you. But if you can figure out how to write on the screen, please do. And I'd love for people to just start typing up some of the things that this voice says. If you write on top of each other, no worries, I can move it for you. Good. Looks like people are finding it. But if you can't find it, again, I can find it. Just put it in the chat and I'll put it on the screen for you. All right. Oh, nice. We got a long one here. Let me make some room. Okay, as I'm doing this, let's just look at these together. There we go. Last one, move that. Okay, great. See them all. Okay, now let's look at all these together and what do we know? What do you notice? What themes do you notice or relate to? You can just hop off mute. Anyone can just chime in.
I think a lot of I'm seeing a lot of validation, like either being like a real writer or like a proven writer, a need for that.
Yeah. You know, that's interesting because you would think that after publishing 3 novels, I would not feel that anymore. And I would say it's changed. It's a different kind of need for validation, but now I should only write if I've been paid, if I'm guaranteed to get a book contract for it. And if I don't have a contract, what am I doing? And that means it's not going to sell. And I mean, so it just takes a new form, you know, which I guess isn't that surprising, but other things.
I'm seeing a lot of negative words here, just the never going to be a successful writer and nothing may ever come of this. You're not going to get anywhere. You're not worth the time. That pressure that I feel when I read this collection of phrases, it feels a little overwhelming just to know those are in other people's heads too. And I can't wait till we move on to the next part, Mary. I'm already looking forward to
escaping these voices
and doing something constructive with these.
Yeah.
Can I just add something? I've been wondering whether many big writers whom we know, whether they were Dostoevsky or Flaubert or whoever, when they were writing at daytime, and there were men obviously as well, whether they had the same pressures, number one, and whether they met with the same negative kind of, reactions as we see here.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you have a theory?
I mean, a lot of big books, as you know, when you read the biographies of greatest writers, many of them, they were written under the great financial pressures because they had to feed their families, their wives were dying of TB or whatever. So a lot of art has been created under great financial pressure. Having said this, I think that actually great creativity is extinguished under the pressure, not ignited under the pressure. So hence the
thinking of it that way, it makes their accomplishments even more extraordinary to me because financial pressure, I know personally how it feels to try to create under that, and it seems even more remarkable that someone can do it under that circumstance. You're right.
I think for me, I also wonder a little bit, and I don't want to assume how anybody in this group identifies, but if there are perhaps different gender role pressures or how that manifests in people's doubts about writing. Like mine are really a lot about time away from my family and feeling selfish for doing that, which I don't know whether or not people who identify as traditionally male even have those ideas or feelings like, oh, if I'm spending 2 hours on a Saturday writing my book, that means I'm not spending 2 hours on a Saturday playing with my kids. I don't know. And I can't make assumptions about people's family situations, but it just occurs to me kind of looking at who's here, wondering how that plays into.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I'm going to a poetry conference all weekend this weekend, and already I feel so guilty about it, which is like, I don't know what to do about that other than just accept that I'm going to feel guilty. But I feel like it's this part. I think you wrote this, Christine. It's the, missing a weekend with my son, and he's only 2 for a few more months.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure my husband has no qualms about taking a 3-hour nap every Sunday afternoon. And yet I'm like upset about taking time away to do something for me.
Yeah, there's certain, I think it's certain that there are gender dynamics at play as well. One thing I noticed that this gets to what you were pointing out, Nicole, is that I think it was Elizabeth Gilbert who talked about this, or I know it's someone recently at something I attended, talked about the tone of the voice in your head and how by paying attention to the tone, it can help you decide whether to listen to that voice. And if the tone is mean, if it's like an asshole tone, then you don't want to be friends with that person. So you don't want to listen to that person. And the tone of the voice that's on the screen right now is being really hard on us. This isn't the tone I would want to take with anyone that I care about. So that's interesting, I think.
But I guess what I think Elizabeth Gilbert and many other people are saying is that kind of recognition of that voice exists, and is a critic's voice. And once you're aware of it, label it and just think, no, it's not me, it's that thing inside. And I am also a creative, a free spirit who wants to let myself go. So
yeah, I love that. Like putting it in its place, letting it exist, but thinking about it in a proper fashion. So now I'd like to turn to actually doing a little bit more specific analysis, not analysis, but kind of critique of these comments. So if you want to look at whether you wrote it on the screen or not, look at your paper, like ask yourself, is this true? Like, is this true? Pick one of them and ask yourself, is this true? And if so, if not, that's interesting, right? That's interesting that that's not true necessarily. But if it is true, does it really mean you still don't want to create? Or do you want to create anyway? And if so, why?
Talk about like one of mine, which is like, you know, nothing may ever come of this. Like, it's true about some things, but not about other things. So for example, like a book may not get published, but it can still be like a creative achievement, you know, that you wrote something and that you learned from it, and maybe it'll make your next piece even better.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on like how you rate your success.
And
Yeah,
how you
that.
value this work, how you see and value your creative work. For sure. I can't put a dollar value on some of the profound transformation that has occurred for me creatively by saying yes to this work, whether anyone else reads it or not. And that's what I always like try to remind myself, is that there is value to this that we can't think of in these terms of buying or selling, or sometimes even sharing. I don't even know sometimes when I'm working on my stuff whether it will be shared, but it is feeding me in a way and nurturing me in a way that I do value. So being reminded of that, finding ways to remind myself of that is really important.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Julius Cameron, the artist way.
Yes.
And he, you know, the whole book is about opening yourself creatively and feeding and nurturing that creative child. And as you're saying, you know, and what she argues that, you know, it's wonderful when it results in a published book and recognized painting or whatever, but you are doing this is a process, developing yourself, and every step along the way is important. So
Yeah.
and this, as I'm saying, and the perception of it, it could be different by us and that different by our families or external environment, and maybe we need to sort of defend ourselves from it, you know.
Yeah, it's really hard, I think, and I love Julia Cameron. I think it's you know, it's interesting, Natalie, when you were saying that a second ago, like not sure if anything will come of this. I think it's really like, of course, because we live in the culture we live in, of course, there's a part of our brains that conflates success, artistic success, with making money off of it, right? Like that, like I need to sell my book, otherwise nothing came of it. And I get it's more complicated than that. I think we also want to be published because we want to connect with readers. We want people to read our work regardless of money. Like it's not all financial, but I think the financial thing really is ingrained in our culture. And my husband used to be an actor, and so all of his friends are also actors, and they became my friends. So I was always with these actors living in New York, and I would see how frustrating it was to them when people would like they would say, "What are you?" And they would say, "I'm an actor." And then people would say, "Oh, you make a living acting?" Like it was like people didn't view it as a real vocation unless it was their sole source of income. And it was also interesting to me to see how even for people who are considered successful actors, they're in that they were successful. I mean, there were several of them were on Broadway. Like that's successful. But even them, they had to supplement a lot of times their income in other ways. They would cater, they would babysit, they would so like being an artist meant having other sources of income, and it has always for me as well. And so I think, you know, when you have kind of, you live in a world where what we define as vocation, what we define as success is often, the way we define those is so often how you're making money. I think it just adds more layers to this pressure we put on ourselves to, like, you know, I'm working on something that eventually needs to sell, otherwise it didn't count or something. And then but I think doing what we're doing now is a way to get around that, because we're like unpacking that and realizing that that's not a truth, that's a delusion. And it's a delusion that we're being fed all the time, so it's easy to fall into. Anyone else want to share thoughts on the truth of it? And if it is true, maybe you want to create anyway, but maybe it's also not necessarily true.
I think if you go back to the deeper question about why you're writing, why you want to write, it's bound to go like deeper than that. Like you feel like when you're creating, you know, or when you're putting something down with words, it's like kind of connected to your true self and your passion and all those things. I think, like, if you feel better, so then if you feel better, you're also going to be better to other people in your life, so that could kind of offset the guilt you might feel. You know, they say take care of yourself, take care of others, I think. So I just think, like, for me, it's like I'll get caught up in that, but when I really have a good writing session, it just I know the reason why I'm doing it again. It's because art.
Yeah, it's the oxygen mask. Oxygen mask.
I mean, obviously, I feel in the place where I am that there's always a danger to going back to a full-time corporate job, which will earn money, much better money, but then you are compromising yourself. You know, you are leaving to an extent a lie, because you don't want to be spending your precious time on something which is not fulfilling, you know, and you know, and then you know, if you spend 8-9 hours in the job, you, first of all, you don't have much money left, but it sucks your energy so badly. Then you are on those crossroads thinking, am I going to give in to those pressures or not? You know, so it's
Yeah, I definitely have been there. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that's the space where we can start to be radical, when we don't allow those pressures to define how we're going to spend our time, or how, you know, that we're going to do the work anyway. So it's going to be fun to think about those ways, because Mary and I have both been in crushing jobs as well.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good transition to the flipping exercise, Nicole. Do you want to introduce that, or do you want me to? I just feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah. So the way that we've been thinking about taking our minds back, taking this power back, and taking our energy and putting it in the creative spaces that we want to be in. We were thinking about how we can flip the script on these messages, these harsh messages in our minds that are preventing us from making progress on our own creative work. So how would it feel to flip some of these phrases that we've written down? And why don't we take a little bit of time to do that now that we're aware of our mindset, so that we can counter that programming with some empowering, affirmative messages for ourselves that we can take with us. So why don't we take a few minutes and write down how we might rewrite or respond to some of these phrases that we've written down, and then we'll come back and see what you've come up with.
Yeah, and just to add, I think it could either be like a response, like a retort, or it could be literally, I don't know if any of you have ever come, is it Brian Katie's exercise where you literally flip it. So instead of I'm a machine, you say I'm not a machine. Or I need to earn money, so the creative activities have to be less important. I don't need to earn money, so the creativity. You actually write the opposite and see how that feels. And if you can actually find as many ways to justify the opposite saying as you can the original thing. Yeah, great.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you. Okay, why don't we, this is going to be a lot more fun to look at on the screen. Why don't we share some of our rewrites? So go ahead and write them on the whiteboard, or you, oh, I didn't mean to stop my share. Go ahead and now write them on the whiteboard, or you can put them in the chat if you want me to post.
I love what I'm seeing. This feels so much better.
Definitely someone you would actually want to spend time with, unlike the first person.
Exactly. I agree. Writing is self-care. Your commitments to yourself are just as important if not more than those to others. Mary and I were talking about kindness a lot, how important kindness is. And you are a real creative. This is hard for everyone. I love that acknowledgement that when we do creative work, it's already hard. I mean, it can be pleasurable and it can be a lot of things, but it is work. And just think about how much harder that is when you have those voices that we're so familiar with telling us all the negatives. This just feels so much better.
Right. So much better. I'm just getting everything on here. And then I am allowed to have multiple sources of income. Man, I fought with that too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. I'm seeing yours, Anna, too, in the chat. Let me throw these up here. Anyone want to share like what your original was and then what your rewrite was, and kind of like just how it feels to that shift, you know, for better or worse, what that shift feels like? I'd love to hear.
I think for me, like one of mine was that this fear of like, if I don't, you know, go 100% in the lane of writing right now, even though that might not be financially possible for me, that I'm not going to get anywhere, or I'm not putting what I need to, and you know, that I should be putting that energy into my writing. But I wrote that about, you know, how many writers have become huge successes through the projects they wrote while they had full-time jobs, and many of them children and families. It doesn't have to be an either or, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, I love that story about John Grisham writing A Time to Kill in 15-minute increments outside of a courtroom while he was a lawyer.
In Memphis.
It was in Memphis? Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really good stories.
I think that William Faulkner he was like in some sort of like engineering plant or something, like in Oxford, and would just kind of like write on his shift as well in just little chunks.
Yeah, George Saunders too was
That's
an
awesome.
engineer, and was just like wrote on the bus on the way to and from work.
That's amazing.
Other people? Is there anything on the screen here that you didn't write, but that you really like?
So I was gonna say that because I didn't write the one on the bottom, but I love the quote of you feel amazing when you write, and how often in life do you get to feel amazing? That really resonated with me.
Me too.
Yeah, I wrote that one.
Oh, good.
Yeah, me too. That's how I feel about it.
I think it's quite interesting now, especially in the pandemic. We are talking so much about mental health, good mental health, and in Britain here, the government is spending a lot of money on mental health services, because it's obviously mental health greatly declined in lockdowns. And it's interesting that when people say, I need this for my good mental health, you know,
Yeah.
I need this, and there is this you know, there is that kind of, you know, a non-negotiable certainty. I need this to do it, you know, because otherwise I'm going to be a danger to myself and the society. And everybody picks it up and believes in it, and straight away if writers would say, you know, I need this to exist, or I need this for my mental health, you know, will people have, you know, believe in us and, you know, treat us with the same sincerity and seriousness?
Yeah. It's so good. I was this the Maya Angelou quote? I didn't write down the source, Nicole, but I think it was Maya Angelou. I'm going to put it in the chat since we don't have any room on the screen. It's to your point, Anna. We found this quote yesterday. I'm almost positive it's Maya Angelou. If I'm not actively creating something, then I'm probably actively destroying something. And it's kind of funny, but it's true. I mean, I feel it's true for me. If I'm not writing, I find that I just suddenly I'm having even if they're minor, like more self-destructive tendencies. And I'm like, I'm burning out. I'm like, you know, binging on sugar. I'm just like not taking care of myself. And then I realized, oh, I haven't written in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Other ones you like here?
I like the permission and I'm allowed to set boundaries so I can do creative work. Boundaries can be really hard, but we do need to be able to do that for ourselves.
Yeah. It's so hard. I was working with a client over the last few months, and the client kept wanting to meet in the mornings. And I was really trying to set the mornings aside to write. And I had to give myself so many pep talks to tell him no when he has to meet in the morning. And I would say, like, Mary, it's okay. You are literally telling him you can meet any afternoon. You are just saying you can't meet in the morning, and it is okay to say that to a person. But it was really surprising how I think it would have been easy for me to say if I had to do something like watch my son or, you know, do something else. But because it was writing that I was preserving, it felt almost like I was doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think someone else is going to say something.
I love the sentence here. Unpaid time and effort is not less valuable than paid time and effort.
Yes.
How long will it take, you know, for people to, and families as well, people to accept this?
Yeah. So true.
I like the quote. I don't think anyone's brought this one up, but that every great writer has been in the place where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, think about, I mean, it's to kind of Anna's point earlier, but I imagine there are very few, because there are very few people who have gone through life not struggling to make ends meet. There are probably very few great writers who went through life not struggling to make ends meet. And that means they were writing around exactly what we're trying to write around. And they did it. And they were just human too. All right, so let's now turn to the part of our discussion where we talk about turning this into action. So actually trying to make some radical choices. So Nicole mentioned at the top of our hour here how she and I have started meeting on Monday mornings, and we don't talk about our businesses. We don't talk about our families. We save that for Marco Polo. But we meet on Monday mornings and we just write, just like we just have a writing session, and we're writing creatively. We're not writing business stuff. And that has felt really, we've only been doing it for 2 weeks and it's been great. How has it been for you, Nicole?
It's been great, but I have to admit, like making the decision, I did feel anxious. I did feel like I was doing something wrong, but nothing fell apart, you know, nothing fell apart because we took that time. And I'm so grateful that we're doing it, and that it does feel like a huge priority to put it right on the first block of time I have on a Monday morning.
Yeah.
It does feel radical, but it also feels amazing.
Yeah. And how often in life do you get to feel amazing?
Exactly. I love that quote, that writer who wrote that.
It does feel it does feel a little bit like a teenager sneaking a cigarette or something.
Exactly.
Maybe why we're calling it radical. Oh, I know what I was going to ask you to share. Will you share the painting story?
Sure, sure. So this wasn't the first time I've done something radical to preserve my creativity. And both times I was feeling like, this time with Mary, I was feeling triggered and angry because it just felt like time just sort of caves in on you. And when I was a younger woman, I had an art show coming up. I'm also a painter, and I was working full time. I was working in the president's office of a university, and so I was a little ill-suited to the job as a creative, but I fit in some ways. And I just remember my boss going away on a holiday or something, and me bringing these huge rolled up canvases in with paint, and unlocking his office on my lunch hour and spending the entire hour just painting in there, and really feeling like I was getting away with something, because there were probably 20 other staff in the office who would have seen me coming and going with my stuff, my supplies, but I had to claim the time and put a stake in it, and it just felt really radical and really good. So that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how we can take time in maybe surprising ways, or ways that feel a little bit like sneaking a cigarette.
Yeah. What is your version of painting on the floor of your boss's office while he's gone?
Well, tell them yours too, Mary. Let's get back to you and your naughty story of.
Well, mine is when I was a lawyer for 7 months, very short time, and very unhappy. I spent my free time writing a screenplay about the office, about the people in the office. And my rebellious move was when we didn't have individual printers. Of course, we had like a floor printer that everyone shared. And I printed the screenplay on the printer and then forgot that it was there. And someone else found it and brought it to me like, are you writing a screenplay about the office?
While
Luckily,
you're working in the office?
While you're working in the office. Like, what's worse, printing it or the fact that you're spending work hours working on it?
Exactly.
But luckily it was my friend who found it.
Very luckily.
So, yeah, very luckily. Although there was a part of me that wanted to get fired. That's probably why I actually did that. All right, so let's take 2 minutes and think, like, what, you don't have to commit to any of these right now, but let's try to commit to one by the end of the day. Maybe just brainstorm, what are some different ways you could radically reclaim your time?
Mm-hmm. Mary, did I tell you that when I worked as a legal assistant in a law office, I wrote poems off the corner of my desk?
Oh yeah, I do remember. That's a great example.
Yeah. And I worked on the train too. I had a whole chapbook written that way, just in transit.
Cool.
My brain, the creative brain doesn't shut down just because you're at work, and you have to catch those words when and those phrases, or they disappear.
Yeah. There's a writer in our group who, or in my writing course community, who works in a hospital, and she's just been writing a novel like on her phone notes app whenever she's just like in between patients and stuff.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Those small spaces of time, just grabbing those small spaces. I think waiting for a big chunk of time is something that's held me back too, is feeling like I can't do it in 15 minutes, but that's absolutely not true.
Right. John Grisham.
Yep.
He did it. All right. Okay, this screen I took a screenshot of because this one I want to preserve so I can send it to everyone. All right, so let's now do third and final share. Let me clear the screen, and would love to see on the screen some of the ideas people have had for reclaiming your time. Stick them in the chat if you want, and I'll put them on the screen for you.
Is that you, Mary?
Yeah. The story behind the one on the left is that I have a novel idea that my agent told me. I love my agent, she's lovely, but she told me she thinks maybe it's too niche. And I really, really want to write it anyway. So I'm gonna write it anyway. And if 3 people read it, 3 people read it. We'll have a great 4-way conversation about it.
I love start a poster board graphic novel on the wall by my desk and fill in a square each day. That sounds so doable. That's great.
Yeah. That sounds so doable. I love the concrete, how concrete and achievable it feels. Oh, that's really fun. Let yourself write fan fiction or something completely different, ridiculous, just for fun, right?
I love it.
What if we just wrote for fun? Imagine that. That is so radical.
We've got more fun. Schedule fun writing sprints with friends. Yes.
Oh, nice. Getting up early in the morning and writing. Then David Duchovny starts at 4:30. Whoa. I always love the idea of getting up that early. And the reality is different.
It's still quite radical.
It is radical.
That's amazing. Write in the car when waiting for kids' school dismissal. I used to do that too. That's a great one.
That's a great one.
Fitting it in.
Instead of listening to a podcast, who needs to listen to more podcasts?
I can testify that popping in with some fan fiction is a complete unblocker. It works wonders.
Cool. What have you written?
Well, I
What
wrote
fan
my
fiction?
dissertation on fan fiction, and
Oh, you did?
I was actually working Xena Warrior Princess fan fiction, but
That's awesome.
but in the middle of deep dissertation time, I just stopped and wrote a fan fiction story because I was like, if I'm going to study it, I better write one just so I can say something about it. And it just flew out.
Wow.
So great.
It's like resting one part of your brain and just rejuvenating your whole spirit by doing something so creative.
Dictating while driving, writing during Zoom calls, not this one. If you wrote during this one, we applaud you. This is
we would totally forgive you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Ellie is sitting in the carpool line right now.
Great. Breit in the chat says taking only a notebook out of the house somewhere for an hour and writing. Oh, that's so good. Like, not even taking your phone so you can't be distracted by notifications. Oh, I really
walking
like that.
and movement is just so good for the creative process too. That's like a double win.
Yes. I love all this pretending. I'm so into the pretending. The pretending is quite radical.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretending is taking your mind back.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Plane didn't have any internet. Sorry. I was on a 6-hour flight.
Oh. So great.
Grocery store parking lot writing.
I have to laugh at the grocery store one. I was taking a night class that was supposed to be 3 hours several years ago. And sometimes it would let out early. And instead of going home, I would drive to the Starbucks on the way home and just sit in my car under the streetlight studying, because I knew once I got home, I wouldn't study and I would feel bad about like not engaging with my husband because I hadn't seen him all night. So I just wouldn't even go home. I would just sit in the Starbucks parking lot and read my textbook and study for like an hour until they turned it off.
Totally.
And I never told
that.
him. He still knows nothing about it to this day.
No need. It's in the past now.
Although it would make a pretty great story if you were ever to write about it.
Yeah.
I'll have to think about that.
I'm just reading. I haven't actually read all of them yet, so I'm just looking through. Change the terms of a freelance job to end by June so I can take summer writing
That's
workshops.
radical.
Yeah.
Take half of lunch hour to eat and then hang with kid and half to work on novel.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So reasonable. No one's getting neglected, but you are nurturing.
No. Yeah, these all seem so modest, like in a good way, you know? It seems like all right, so let's commit to something. You know, you don't have to share, but think of something you want to do and let's do it. Your version of my and Nicole's Monday writing sessions. So we have make your shopping trips last longer. Go to the coffee shop for an hour before going home. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, it's so interesting because it's like we're seeing on the screen here how like we all recognize that it doesn't have to be a 2-hour block. Like you don't need a huge, we tell ourselves that we do, like you were saying, Nicole, but we don't actually need 2 hours to get a lot done.
I think as long as you're touching it frequently, it won't take you forever to get back in.
Yeah.
Sprint and then go back to life and regular life.
Yeah. Okay, so before we wrap up, I do want to share, I told Nicole the other day, an inspiring thing that my husband accidentally said. We were talking about the phrase, shoot for the moon and you'll land among the stars. And I was making fun of it because the stars are farther away than the moon. So it doesn't make sense. It should be shoot for the stars and you'll land on the moon. And my husband said, no, it should be shoot for the stars and you'll probably die broke, but at least you tried to do something. And he was kidding, but I was like, that's kind of moving. I actually really like what you just said. So I'll leave us with an unintentionally inspiring quote from Lucas. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here? We will send around, I'm going to send around a copy of a list, or I'll type them up, of both of these screens, just so we can see what other people are doing and maybe be inspired by each other's commitments to radically reclaim our time. Thanks. I see your note, Amy, in the chat. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'll stop recording. I'll also send around the recording if you want to share it or rewatch. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.